a flashing red and blue light in the rearview mirror. For most, it's a simple speeding ticket. But for a black man driving through an affluent, heavily policed suburb, it can instantly turn into a nightmare. When an arrogant, prejudiced patrolman pulled over a quiet, well-dressed driver on a rainy Tuesday night, he thought he'd caught an easy target. He threatened the man with years in a concrete cell, entirely blind to the fact that the man in handcuffs was a federal judge. He had just arrested the one man who could dismantle his life. The rain came down in relentless, freezing sheets, slicking the asphalt of Interstate 90 into a mirror of reflecting taillights. Inside his meticulously maintained 2018 Lexus LS, the Honorable Arthur T. Pendleton let out a long, heavy sigh. At 62 years old, Arthur had spent the last 3 decades of his life navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the American justice system. For the past 12 years, he had served as a federal judge for the United States District Court. He was a man of immense intellect, known for his stoic demeanor, his razor-sharp legal mind, and a patience that had been forged in the fires of 1,000 grueling trials. Today had been particularly exhausting. He had spent 9 hours presiding over a complex corporate malfeasance case, passing through thousands of pages of financial jargon. All he wanted was to return to his quiet home, pour a glass of neat bourbon, and read something that didn't require a legal dictionary. But a massive pileup on the interstate had forced a mandatory detour. Arthur's GPS rerouted him through Oakmont Hills, an ultra-wealthy, predominantly white enclave nestled just outside the city limits. Oakmont Hills was the kind of town where the property taxes were exorbitant, the lawns were manicured with surgical precision, and the local police department had a notorious, unspoken reputation for aggressively patrolling their borders. Arthur adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and kept his eyes on the road, maintaining a strict speed of 28 miles per hour in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. He knew the unwritten rules. He had lived them his entire life. A black man in a luxury car driving through a town like Oakmont Hills after dark was a magnet for trouble. It didn't matter that he had a law degree from Harvard. It didn't matter that his signature could authorize federal wiretaps or send a man to federal prison. In the dark, behind the wheel, he was just a profile. A mile down elm-lined Harrison Avenue, an Oakmont Hills police cruiser sat idling in the shadows of a defunct strip mall. Inside sat Officer Brian Gallagher. Gallagher was 34, sporting a high and tight haircut, and an ego that far exceeded his badge. He had spent 8 years on the force, building a career out of minor drug busts and aggressive traffic stops. Gallagher viewed himself as the ultimate gatekeeper of Oakmont Hills, protecting its pristine streets from undesirables drifting in from the city. He had a sixth sense, or so he bragged to his buddies at the precinct, for spotting people who didn't belong. As Arthur's Lexus glided past the dark parking lot, Gallagher's eyes narrowed. The car was clean, maybe too clean. The windows had a slight factory tint, but not enough to obscure the silhouette of the driver. Gallagher squinted, making out the profile of an older black man at the wheel. Instantly, the gears in Gallagher's mind began turning. A high-end luxury car, an out-of-town driver, a demographic that, in Gallagher's deeply prejudiced worldview, had no legitimate business cruising through Oakmont Hills at 10 o'clock at night. Gallagher shifted the cruiser into drive and pulled out, falling in 2 car lengths behind the Lexus. Arthur saw the headlights instantly. A cold, familiar knot formed in the pit of his stomach. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in years, not since he was a young public defender driving through the southern counties. He checked his speedometer. Still 28. He checked his lane positioning. Perfect. He signaled well in advance before making a slow, deliberate right turn onto Maple Drive, a winding residential street that the GPS insisted led back to the main highway. Gallagher followed. "Let's see what you do," Gallagher muttered to himself, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. He watched the Lexus intently, waiting for the slightest infraction. A tire touching the yellow line, a failure to signal a full 100 feet before a turn. A rolling stop. But Arthur drove flawlessly. Frustrated, Gallagher decided he didn't need a real reason. He just needed a pretext. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. Gallagher keyed his radio. "I'm initiating a traffic stop on a black Lexus sedan, late model, Illinois plates, suspicious vehicle, possible window tint violation, and failure to maintain lane." "Copy, Unit 4, the dispatcher crackled back. Gallagher reached up and flicked the switch. The night exploded in blinding red and blue. Inside the Lexus, Arthur Pendleton let out a slow, quiet breath. He pulled over immediately, maneuvering the heavy car safely onto the shoulder beneath a flickering street lamp. He shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his window. Then, acting on a lifetime of ingrained survival instincts, he placed both hands flat on the top of the steering wheel, right at 10 and 2, and waited. The rain drummed heavily against the roof of the Lexus. In his side mirror, Arthur watched Officer Gallagher step out of the cruiser. The officer took his time, adjusting his duty belt, shining a high-powered tactical flashlight directly into Arthur's side mirror to blind him, before beginning the slow, deliberate walk toward the driver's side door. As Gallagher approached, he instinctively unclipped the retention strap on his holster. It was an intimidation tactic, pure and simple. "Evening," Gallagher said, his voice flat, his tone dripping with an unearned authority. He kept the flashlight beam aimed directly into Arthur's eyes, refusing to let the older man see his face clearly. "Good evening, officer," Arthur replied. His voice was a rich, deep baritone, entirely calm and devoid of the nervous flutter most citizens exhibited during a traffic stop. Arthur had stared down cartel bosses and corrupt politicians in his courtroom. A local patrolman's aggressive posturing was practically amateur hour. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" Gallagher asked, leaning slightly closer to the window, his eyes aggressively sweeping the immaculate interior of the Lexus. "I confess, I do not," Arthur said smoothly. "I was driving under the speed limit. My registration is current, and my vehicle is in complete working order." "Perhaps you could enlighten me." Gallagher's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way this man spoke. He didn't like the vocabulary, the lack of fear, the quiet dignity. To a man like Gallagher, a citizen's dignity felt like defiance. "You swerved back there," Gallagher lied without a second thought. "Failure to maintain your lane. Plus, your window tint looks illegally dark. Where you headed tonight, buddy?" The word buddy hung in the air, a deliberate microaggression meant to strip away respect. "I am heading home, officer," Arthur replied, choosing to ignore the fabricated traffic violations for the moment. "The interstate was backed up due to a collision, and my navigation system routed me through Oakmont Hills. I am simply passing through." "Passing through," Gallagher repeated, skeptically. He shone the light into the back seat, looking for anything, a duffel bag, a stray wrapper, a scent that he could use as probable cause. There was nothing but a leather briefcase sitting neatly on the passenger seat. "Whose car is this?" "It is my vehicle, officer." "You got a license and registration?" Gallagher demanded, his tone hardening. "I do. My license is in my wallet, which is in my left interior jacket pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. With your permission, I will reach for them now." Gallagher paused, slightly thrown by the hyper-compliant, procedural way Arthur spoke. It aggravated him further. "Just get the license. Keep your hands where I can see them." Arthur slowly reached into his tailored charcoal suit jacket, retrieved his wallet, and extracted his driver's license. He handed it through the window. Gallagher snatched it, shining his light onto the plastic. Arthur Pendleton, Gallagher read aloud. He looked from the ID to Arthur's face. You live in the city. Long way from home, Arthur. As I explained, I was rerouted. Yeah, I heard your story. Gallagher sneered. What do you do for work, Art? Arthur's eyes narrowed fractionally. Art. He had tolerated the baseless stop. He had tolerated the lie about the swerving, but the officer's rapid descent into outright disrespect was testing his legendary patience. Yet Arthur knew the law. He knew that the side of the road was not a courtroom, and arguing with a man holding a gun and a badge was a fool's errand. I work in the legal profession, officer, Arthur answered carefully. He had no desire to pull rank. He abhorred the idea of flashing his federal credentials to get out of a traffic stop. He firmly believed the law should apply equally to everyone, whether they were a janitor or a federal judge. If this officer was harassing him, he wanted to experience exactly what any other black man in his position would experience, without the magic shield of his title. Legal profession, Gallagher scoffed. What, you a paralegal? A clerk? I am employed by the federal government. Gallagher laughed, a short, bitter sound. Right, listen to me carefully. I've got a rash of burglaries in this neighborhood. High-end stuff. Guys coming in from the city, driving fancy cars they probably can't afford, casing the houses. You fit the description. Arthur stared at him. Officer, I am 62 years old. I am wearing a custom-tailored suit. Does it appear to you that I am casing homes in a rainstorm? Don't get smart with me, boy, Gallagher snapped, his temper flaring. The racial slur, thinly veiled but unmistakably present in its tone, struck the air like a physical blow. Arthur's expression went entirely cold. The grandfatherly warmth vanished, replaced by the terrifying, statuesque stillness that usually preceded his most devastating courtroom rulings. I highly suggest you reconsider your tone, officer, Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating an absolute, freezing authority. And I suggest you run my license, issue a citation if you truly believe I committed a traffic infraction, and allow me to go on my way. You have no reasonable, articulable suspicion to detain me any further. Gallagher stepped back, genuinely shocked by the command in Arthur's voice. But shock quickly gave way to blinding fury. Who the hell did this guy think he was? In Oakmont Hills, nobody spoke to Brian Gallagher like that, especially not a black man pulled over in the dead of night. Step out of the car, Gallagher ordered, dropping his hand firmly onto the grip of his service weapon. On what legal grounds? Arthur asked calmly, his hands remaining locked on the steering wheel. Under Pennsylvania v. Mims, you have the right to order me out of the vehicle for officer safety. But considering I have been completely compliant, and my hands have not moved, I must ask if you are giving me a lawful order, or if you are simply trying to escalate a situation because I bruised your ego. Gallagher's face flushed scarlet. He unholstered his taser with his left hand, aiming the red laser dot squarely at Arthur's chest. I said, "Step out of the damn car, now, or I will drag you out and charge you with resisting arrest." Arthur looked at the red dot painted on his suit. He looked at the trembling anger in the officer's eyes. He knew exactly how this script ended if he didn't comply. He had presided over the civil wrongful death suits. He had seen the dashcam videos of men just like him, dying on wet asphalt over bruised police egos. "I am complying," Arthur said softly. "I am turning off the ignition. I am unbuckling my seatbelt. I am opening the door." Arthur stepped out into the freezing rain. The cold water instantly soaked into his wool suit, chilling him to the bone. He stood at his full height, 6'2", and looked down at Gallagher. Even standing still, Arthur possessed an aura of undeniable authority. "Turn around," Gallagher barked, stepping forward aggressively. "Put your hands on the roof of the car. Spread your legs." Arthur turned slowly in the rain, placing his palms flat against the slick, wet roof of his Lexus. He spread his feet. Gallagher moved in, kicking Arthur's ankles further apart with entirely unnecessary force, nearly causing the older man to slip on the wet pavement. Gallagher began a frantic, aggressive pat-down. He dragged his hands up Arthur's legs, checking his waistline, patting down his chest. He reached into Arthur's pockets, pulling out his keys, a Mont Blanc fountain pen, and a folded handkerchief, tossing them carelessly onto the wet hood of the cruiser behind them. "Where are the drugs?" Gallagher hissed near Arthur's ear. "There are no drugs," Arthur replied, his voice a low, steady rumble over the sound of the storm. "There are no weapons. There is no stolen property. You are conducting an illegal search under the Fourth Amendment, lacking both probable cause and my consent." "I don't need your consent," Gallagher sneered, pulling Arthur's arms violently behind his back. The sudden, sharp movement tore at Arthur's rotator cuff, sending a bolt of white-hot pain through his shoulder. Arthur winced but didn't cry out. "I'm taking you in," Gallagher said, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee. "You want to act like a lawyer? You can do it from a holding cell. You're under arrest." "For what crime?" Arthur asked, maintaining his icy composure. "Resisting a lawful order, obstructing an investigation. I'll think of a few more on the drive down." Gallagher laughed darkly. He unclipped his steel handcuffs. Click, click. The cold metal bit violently into Arthur's wrists. Gallagher ratcheted the cuffs down as tight as they would go, purposefully pinching the skin and compressing the ulnar nerve. Arthur gritted his teeth as a sharp numbness shot down into his hands. "You think you're so smart," Gallagher taunted, grabbing Arthur by the back of his jacket collar and frog-marching him toward the police cruiser. "People like you coming into this neighborhood, talking down to me. I deal with garbage like you every day. I'm going to make sure the DA buries you. You're looking at a felony charge, Art. That's prison time. Let's see how articulate you are when you're locked in a concrete box for 3 years." Arthur stopped walking. Even with his hands bound behind his back, he planted his feet firmly on the wet asphalt and turned his head to look Gallagher dead in the eye. The look in the judge's eyes was so piercing, so devoid of fear, that Gallagher involuntarily stopped pushing. "Officer Gallagher," Arthur said softly, his voice cutting through the rain with terrifying clarity. "I want you to remember everything you are doing right now. I want you to remember the threats you just made. I want you to remember the fabricated charges. Because I assure you, by the time the sun rises tomorrow, your life as you know it will be entirely over." Gallagher blinked, momentarily unsettled, but his arrogance quickly swallowed his hesitation. He shoved Arthur hard against the side of the cruiser. "Is that a threat?" Gallagher yelled. "You threatening a police officer? Add that to the list, buddy. Get in the car." Gallagher opened the rear door of the cruiser and forcefully pushed Arthur inside. Because Arthur was tall, his head hit the doorframe hard as he was shoved downward. He collapsed onto the hard plastic back seat, his bound arms twisted painfully beneath him. The door slammed shut with a deafening metallic thud. In the dark, claustrophobic rear of the squad car, smelling of disinfectant and stale sweat, Arthur struggled to sit upright. His wrists were bleeding slightly from the tight steel, his tailored suit was ruined, and his head throbbed from striking the doorframe. Through the plexiglass partition, he watched Gallagher walk back to the Lexus. The officer grabbed Arthur's expensive leather briefcase from the passenger seat, tossed it carelessly into the front of the cruiser, and slammed the door. He didn't even bother to secure the Lexus. He just left it sitting on the side of the road with the flashers on. Gallagher got into the driver's seat, dripping wet, and put the car in gear. He looked at Arthur in the rearview mirror, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. "You're done, old man," Gallagher said. Next stop, county lockup. Arthur Pendleton leaned his head back against the plastic seat, closing his eyes. The rage inside him was a quiet, controlled inferno. He was not just a man who knew the law. He was a man who commanded the law. He had dedicated his life to the pursuit of justice, to ensuring that the power of the state was wielded fairly. And now he was sitting in the back of a police car, a victim of the exact systemic rot he fought against every day. He didn't say another word. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He didn't reveal his identity. He simply sat in the darkness, letting the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers count down the final minutes of Officer Brian Gallagher's career. Gallagher had no idea. As the cruiser sped through the rainy streets toward the Oakmont Hills Police Department, the arrogant cop was busy mentally drafting a police report full of lies, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of what he had just done. He hadn't just arrested an innocent man. He had arrested a sitting federal judge of the United States District Court. And Arthur was going to let him dig his grave all the way to the bottom. The Oakmont Hills Police Department was a brick-and-glass fortress of municipal overfunding, boasting state-of-the-art holding cells and heavily polished granite floors. At 11:15 at night, the precinct was a quiet cavern of harsh fluorescent lights, echoing with the hum of vending machines and the sporadic chatter of police dispatch, when Officer Brian Gallagher hauled Arthur Pendleton through the heavy double doors. The squeak of Gallagher's wet, tactical boots broke the midnight monotony. Arthur walked with his head held high, his posture impeccably straight, despite his soaking wet, ruined bespoke suit and the agonizing pressure of the steel cuffs cutting off the circulation to his hands. Sitting behind the raised booking desk was Desk Sergeant Thomas O'Reilly. O'Reilly was 58, a heavy-set, world-weary veteran of the force who was just 2 years away from a comfortable pension. He had seen every type of criminal walk through those doors, but as he peered over his reading glasses, his instincts immediately flared. The man Gallagher was shoving toward the desk didn't look like a burglar. He didn't look like a vagrant or a drug dealer. He looked like a CEO who had been caught in a shipwreck. "What do we have, Gallagher?" O'Reilly grunted, reaching for a blank intake form. "Got a live one tonight, Sarge," Gallagher boasted, loudly enough for the 2 younger officers in the adjacent squad room to hear. He shoved Arthur roughly against the booking counter, caught him prowling through the Maple Drive sector, refused a lawful order, resisted arrest, obstructed my investigation. Probably casing the neighborhood for the burglary ring. "I want him in holding while I write up the felonies." O'Reilly looked at Arthur. He noticed the blood trickling down Arthur's left wrist, mixing with the rainwater. He noticed the calm, unnervingly steady gaze of the suspect. "Name?" O'Reilly asked. "Arthur Pendleton," Arthur replied, his voice a calm, deep resonance that seemed entirely out of place in a booking room. O'Reilly paused. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Okay, Arthur. Turn around. Let's get those cuffs off for the search." Gallagher unclipped his keys, grinning. "Don't let him fool you, Sarge. He's a talker. Thinks he's a lawyer or something." Gallagher unlocked the cuffs. Arthur brought his hands forward slowly, wincing as the blood rushed back into his severely bruised wrists. He didn't rub them. He simply placed his hands flat on the booking counter, turning his penetrating gaze to O'Reilly. "Sergeant," Arthur said smoothly, "I am officially requesting that you preserve all dash cam and body cam footage from Officer Gallagher's vehicle and person, time stamped from 2200 hours onward. Furthermore, I am notifying you that I am being held without probable cause, and I request my phone to contact legal counsel." Gallagher let out a barking laugh. "Listen to this guy. Thinks he's on television. Dump your pockets, Art." Arthur ignored Gallagher entirely, keeping his eyes locked on O'Reilly. The sergeant frowned. The precision of the man's language was unsettling. Usually, suspects screamed, cried, or hurled profanities. They didn't issue legal preservation directives. Gallagher, annoyed by Arthur's stoicism, grabbed the wet leather briefcase he had confiscated from the Lexus and slammed it onto the counter. He then tossed Arthur's wallet, keys, and fountain pen next to it. "Here's his property," Gallagher said. "I'm going to go get some dry clothes from my locker and start the paperwork. Put him in cell 2. Don't let him make a call until I say so." "You know that's not how it works, Brian," O'Reilly sighed, rubbing his temples. "He gets a call." "After booking," Gallagher shot back, turning on his heel and swaggering down the hallway toward the locker room, entirely confident that he was the king of the castle. Left alone at the desk with Arthur, O'Reilly pulled on a pair of blue latex nitrile gloves to begin the mandatory property inventory. "All right, Mr. Pendleton, I have to inventory your belongings before I can put you in a cell. Any weapons, needles, or contraband in this bag?" "None," Arthur said quietly, "though I strongly advise you to pay close attention to the contents of that wallet and briefcase, Sergeant." O'Reilly gave him a weary look. "Right." The sergeant picked up the soaked leather wallet. He opened it, pulling out the soggy driver's license. Arthur T. Pendleton. He wrote it down. He pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills, a platinum American Express card, and a health insurance card. Standard items. Then O'Reilly reached into the back compartment of the wallet. His fingers brushed against something heavy, made of thick embossed leather. He pulled it out. It was a trifold credential case. O'Reilly flipped it open. The overhead fluorescent light caught the gleam of a solid gold shield. Underneath the shield, sealed in tamper-proof government laminate, was an identification card bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice. The text was printed in bold, undeniable letters. United States District Court, the Honorable Arthur T. Pendleton, Article 3. Judge Wook. O'Reilly stopped breathing. The air in the booking room seemed to instantly evaporate. The sergeant's eyes darted from the golden seal to the ID photo, and then slowly up to the towering, quiet black man standing on the other side of the counter. "Oh, sweet Jesus," O'Reilly whispered, his face draining of all color. Arthur did not blink. "If you open the briefcase, Sergeant, you will find the sentencing guidelines for United States versus the Van Comp Corporation. A multi-million-dollar federal embezzlement case I am presiding over tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Documents that Officer Gallagher has now unlawfully seized." O'Reilly's hands were shaking so violently that he dropped the credential case onto the desk. He felt a cold sweat break out across his neck. He had been a cop for 30 years. He knew the hierarchy of power. A patrol officer was the bottom of the food chain. A federal judge was a god. A sitting Article 3 judge, appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate, possessed a level of power that could wipe the entire Oakmont Hills Police Department off the map with a single injunction. Your Honor," O'Reilly stammered, his voice cracking. He practically ripped the latex gloves off his hands. "Your Honor, I had no idea." "I am aware, Sergeant O'Reilly," Arthur said softly. "You did not pull me over. You did not assault me. You did not fabricate charges against me. I'm releasing you right now," O'Reilly said frantically, reaching for the precinct override keys. "I'll get your car brought here. I'll personally drive you home. We can clear this all up. It's a massive misunderstanding, sir." "Do not touch those keys," Arthur commanded. The volume of his voice barely rose, but the absolute, crushing authority behind it froze O'Reilly in his tracks. "Sir?" O'Reilly swallowed hard. "I have been formally placed under arrest by an officer of your department," Arthur stated, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fury. "I have been subjected to an illegal search an unconstitutional seizure, and physical assault. I have been threatened with fabricated felony charges to intimidate me. If I were any other black man from the city, I would currently be locked in that cell, facing a ruined life because of the perjury of an arrogant man with a badge. I am not leaving. Judge Pendleton, please, if the chief finds out, you are going to call your chief, Arthur interrupted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. You will wake him up. You will tell him to come down here immediately, and you will not tell Officer Gallagher a single thing until the chief arrives. Am I understood, Sergeant? O'Reilly looked at the federal credentials, and then at the bleeding wrists of the most powerful man he had ever met. Yes, Your Honor. Right away, Your Honor. Chief of Police. David Harrison was deeply asleep in his sprawling, 5-bedroom suburban home when his cell phone began to vibrate violently on the nightstand. At 52, Harrison was a political survivor. He had spent years carefully managing the wealthy, demanding residents of Oakmont Hills, keeping crime statistics virtually non-existent, and ensuring his department remained fully funded. He fumbled for the phone, squinting at the bright screen. It was the precinct desk. Harrison, he grumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Chief, it's Sergeant O'Reilly. You need to get down to the precinct right now. Harrison sat up, rubbing his eyes. O'Reilly wasn't the type to panic. Tommy, it's almost midnight. What's going on? We have a homicide. Worse. O'Reilly's voice was a ragged, terrified whisper. Gallagher brought a guy in, traffic stop on Maple, charged him with resisting, obstruction, the whole 9 yards. And, Harrison sighed, already reaching for his pants. Gallagher's an aggressive idiot, but why are you waking me up for a traffic dispute? Chief, O'Reilly said, pausing as if the words physically burned his throat. The suspect is Arthur Pendleton. Harrison froze. The name hit him like a physical blow to the chest. David Harrison wasn't just a local cop. He had spent a decade as an investigator for the state attorney's office before taking the chief's job. He knew every major player in the regional justice system. He knew Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton was legendary. He was the judge who had fearlessly dismantled the Rossi crime family. He was the judge who had held 2 FBI agents in contempt of court for lying on a warrant. Pendleton was brilliant, ruthless in his application of the law, and absolutely terrifying when crossed. Tommy, Chief Harrison breathed, the blood roaring in his ears. Please tell me you are joking. Please tell me you have a different Arthur Pendleton. Black guy, 60s, custom suit. I'm staring at his gold DOJ shield right now, Chief. Gallagher handcuffed him, threw him in the back of the cruiser. He's bleeding, Chief. His wrists are bleeding. Harrison dropped the phone. A wave of profound, existential nausea washed over him. He scrambled out of bed, not even bothering to change out of his pajama shirt. He threw a heavy winter coat over it, shoved his bare feet into a pair of loafers, and sprinted for his SUV. As he tore out of his driveway, breaking every speed limit toward the station, his mind was racing through the catastrophic fallout: false arrest, assault under color of law, civil rights violations, a Section 1983 federal lawsuit. The Department of Justice would descend on Oakmont Hills like a swarm of locusts. The media would have a field day. White suburb cops brutalize black federal judge. His career was over. The city would be bankrupted by the settlement. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Officer Gallagher was in the break room, pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. He had changed into a dry uniform shirt and was feeling incredibly pleased with himself. A young rookie, Officer Miller, was heating up a Tupperware container of pasta in the microwave. "Rough night out there, Brian?" Miller asked, nodding at Gallagher's wet hair. "Nothing I can't handle," Gallagher smirked, taking a sip of the hot coffee. "Just had to put some city trash in his place. Guy was driving a 90 grand Lexus through my sector, giving me lip. Thinks because he wears a suit, he can talk down to me. What did you hit him with? Failure to maintain lane to get him stopped. Gallagher laughed openly, admitting to the pretextual stop without a care in the world. Then he refused to step out, so I yanked him out. Tagged him with resisting arrest, obstruction. I'm going to talk to the DA tomorrow, see if we can tack on a felony intimidation charge. I want to see this guy sweat in county lockup for the weekend. Damn, Miller chuckled nervously. You don't mess around. Damn right I don't, Gallagher said, puffing out his chest. This is our town. You gotta let these people know they can't just wander in here and act like they own the place. Gallagher tossed his empty sugar packet into the trash and walked out of the break room, heading toward the booking desk to collect his paperwork. He expected to see his suspect locked safely in cell 2, humiliated and defeated. Instead, he walked into a scene of absolute chaos. The heavy glass doors of the precinct flew open, violently crashing against the security stoppers. Chief David Harrison stormed in, his coat flapping open to reveal his plaid pajama shirt, his face an apoplectic shade of crimson. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting wildly around the room until they locked onto the booking desk. Judge Arthur Pendleton was sitting calmly on a wooden bench against the wall, sipping a cup of water Sergeant O'Reilly had provided. He looked up as the chief entered, his expression completely unreadable. Harrison ignored his own officers entirely. He practically threw himself across the room, stopping 3 feet from Arthur. The chief of police, a man who commanded absolute obedience in this town, removed his hat and bowed his head slightly. Judge Pendleton, Harrison said, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and deep, groveling respect. Your Honor, I cannot begin to apologize. I am profoundly, deeply sorry. This is a catastrophic failure of my department. Gallagher, who had just stepped into the hallway, froze. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor and shattering, splashing hot brown liquid across the polished granite. Judge? Your Honor? The words echoed in Gallagher's brain, refusing to compute. He stared at the old black man he had just threatened with prison time. He remembered the man's calm demeanor. He remembered the warnings. I want you to remember the threats you just made. By the time the sun rises tomorrow, your life as you know it will be entirely over. Chief, Gallagher squeaked, his voice cracking like a terrified adolescent. Chief, what's going on? Who is this guy? Harrison turned slowly. The look of groveling apology vanished from the chief's face, replaced by a look of murderous, unadulterated hatred directed squarely at Brian Gallagher. Shut your mouth, Gallagher, Harrison roared, his voice booming through the station. Do not say another word. Stand against that wall and do not move a single muscle. Harrison turned back to Arthur, visibly sweating. Your Honor, I will personally drive you home. We will drop all charges immediately. There will be no record of this. And I assure you, Officer Gallagher will be severely disciplined. He will be suspended without pay, pending an internal review. Arthur placed his plastic water cup gently onto the bench. He stood up slowly, towering over the chief of police. He looked at Harrison, then he looked past him, locking eyes with a pale, shivering Officer Gallagher. Chief Harrison, Arthur said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the precinct. I do not want an apology. I do not want a quiet ride home. And I certainly do not want an internal review conducted behind closed doors. Harrison swallowed hard. What do you want, Your Honor? Officer Gallagher arrested me under the color of law, depriving me of my constitutional rights, Arthur stated, stepping forward. He fabricated evidence, committed perjury in his initial verbal report, and physically assaulted me. Therefore, I am not leaving this precinct. Instead, I suggest you call the local field office. I want Special Agent in Charge Gregory Walsh of the FBI down here, immediately. to open a federal civil rights investigation. And until he arrives, I want Officer Gallagher's badge and service weapon placed on this desk." Arthur's eyes drifted back to Gallagher, cold and unrelenting. "Because," Arthur finished, "Officer Gallagher is no longer a police officer. He is a federal suspect." The silence in the precinct was deafening, heavy and suffocating like the calm eye of a hurricane. Chief David Harrison stood frozen, the color completely drained from his face. He looked at Arthur Pendleton, standing tall and resolute, and then turned his gaze to Officer Brian Gallagher. Gallagher was trembling. The bravado that had fueled his entire adult life, the badge, the gun, the power to ruin lives on a whim, was vaporizing before his eyes. "Chief," Gallagher pleaded, his voice a pathetic, reedy whine. "Chief, you can't be serious. He was swerving. He refused a lawful order. You're going to take the word of a suspect over your own officer?" "Shut your damn mouth, Brian," Harrison hissed, stepping toward the younger officer. The instinct for self-preservation had fully overridden any sense of loyalty Harrison had to his department. He knew that if he did not comply with Arthur's exact demands, he would be indicted right alongside Gallagher for a conspiracy to cover up a federal crime. "Hand over your weapon. Unclip the duty belt. Now." "Chief, please, do it," Harrison roared, the sound echoing off the polished granite floors. Shaking uncontrollably, Gallagher fumbled with the thick, black, plastic buckle of his duty belt. His fingers lacked their usual dexterity. Finally, the buckle gave way, and the heavy belt, carrying his Glock 19, his taser, his cuffs, and his radio, slid from his waist and hit the floor with a loud, metallic clatter. He unpinned his silver Oakmont Hills badge from his chest, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he dropped it onto the booking desk, right next to Arthur's gold Department of Justice shield. "Go sit in the interrogation room," Harrison ordered, pointing a trembling finger down the hall. "Do not touch your phone. Do not speak to anyone." As Gallagher shuffled away, a hollow shell of the tyrant he had been an hour prior, Harrison turned back to Arthur. "Your Honor, I will make the call to the field office immediately." For the next 90 minutes, the Oakmont Hills Police Department felt like a morgue. Arthur sat patiently on the wooden bench, having finally accepted a clean, dry towel from a terrified Officer Miller to drape over his soaking shoulders. He didn't pace. He didn't speak. He simply waited, his presence acting as an oppressive weight on every cop in the building. At exactly 1:15 a.m., the glass doors of the precinct slid open, and the atmosphere in the room violently shifted. 4 men in dark suits walked in, led by Special Agent in Charge Gregory Walsh. Walsh was a towering, broad-shouldered man with close-cropped silver hair and the grim, unyielding demeanor of a man who had spent 20 years dismantling organized crime syndicates and corrupt politicians. Following closely behind him were 3 armed federal agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with the bright yellow letters, FBI. Walsh bypassed the booking desk entirely, his eyes locking onto Arthur. A look of deep, genuine concern crossed the veteran agent's face. He had worked with Judge Pendleton for years, securing warrants and testifying in his courtroom. "Arthur," Walsh said, extending a hand. "Are you all right?" "I am bruised, Agent Walsh, but I am unharmed," Arthur replied, shaking the man's hand firmly. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Walsh's eyes dropped to Arthur's wrists. The deep purple contusions and the dried blood where the handcuffs had bitten into the skin were impossible to miss. Walsh's jaw tightened into a hard, unforgiving line. He turned slowly to face Chief Harrison. "Chief Harrison," Walsh said, his voice deceptively quiet. "I am officially taking jurisdiction of this precinct. My agents will be locking down your server room to preserve all digital evidence, including dispatch logs, body cam footage, and dash cam video. Where is the officer responsible for this? Interrogation Room A, Agent Walsh. Harrison swallowed hard. Before we speak to him, Arthur interjected smoothly, I believe it would be prudent to review the audio-visual evidence of the traffic stop. Officer Gallagher was quite confident that I was swerving, resisting arrest, and casing the neighborhood. Let us see what the cameras captured. Harrison gestured weakly to Sergeant O'Reilly. Tommy, pull up Unit 4's dash cam and body cam on the main monitor. O'Reilly quickly typed on his keyboard, bringing up the precinct's main server display on the large wall-mounted television above the booking desk. I have the dash cam, Chief, but... O'Reilly hesitated, clicking his mouse frantically. Gallagher's body cam. The file is empty. It looks like he manually powered it down right before he exited the cruiser. A collective gasp swept through the room. Gallagher had purposefully killed his microphone and chest camera, so there would be no audio of his racial slurs and fabricated threats. It was a classic, dirty cop maneuver. He turned it off, Harrison whispered, burying his face in his hands. He knew how this looked to the FBI. It looked like an institutional cover-up. But Special Agent Walsh just smiled. A cold, predatory smile. Chief Harrison, Walsh said, pulling an encrypted tablet from his briefcase. Are you aware of the Department of Justice grant your city accepted last October to upgrade your vehicle fleets? Harrison looked up, confused. Yes, we installed the new Axon Fleet 3 systems. Exactly, Walsh nodded, tapping rapidly on his tablet. And as part of that federal grant, those systems came with an automatic, tamper-proof redundancy protocol. The moment Officer Gallagher activated his overhead light bar, the dual microphone array inside the cruiser began recording. It syncs with the officer's lapel mic via Bluetooth. Even if he powers down his primary chest camera, the cruiser's system continues recording raw audio, uploading it directly to an encrypted cloud server that your local IT department cannot access, nor can they delete it. Walsh looked at Arthur. With your permission, Your Honor. Proceed, Arthur said. Walsh connected his tablet to the wall monitor. The screen flickered, showing the high-definition, wide-angle view from Gallagher's dashboard. The rain was lashing against the windshield. The black Lexus was pulled over perfectly on the shoulder. Then, the audio kicked in. It was crystal clear. The entire precinct stood in dead silence as the true events of the night echoed through the room. They heard Arthur's calm, perfectly polite, legally sound responses, and they heard Gallagher's vile escalation. Don't get smart with me, boy. The racial slur hung in the air like toxic smoke. Chief Harrison closed his eyes, physically sickened. I'm going to make sure the DA buries you. You're looking at a felony charge, Art. That's prison time. Let's see how articulate you are when you're locked in a concrete box for 3 years. The recording ended with the deafening thud of Gallagher slamming Arthur's head into the doorframe of the cruiser. Agent Walsh disconnected the tablet and handed it to one of his agents. Agent Miller, go to Interrogation Room A. Place Brian Gallagher under federal arrest for deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C., Section 242. Read him his Miranda rights. If he speaks, document it. If he resists, you have my full authorization to use force. 2 FBI agents drew their handcuffs and marched down the hallway. Seconds later, the muffled sound of Gallagher shouting in panic echoed from the back rooms. I'm a cop! You can't do this! Chief, help me! The shouts were abruptly cut off by the heavy thud of a body being slammed against a wall, followed by the distinctive, metallic click of federal handcuffs locking into place. Arthur Pendleton adjusted his ruined suit jacket. He looked at Chief Harrison, who looked like a man standing on the gallows watching the lever being pulled. Chief Harrison, Arthur said, his voice devoid of anger, replaced only by a cold, clinical certainty. You run a department where an officer felt entirely comfortable turning off his camera, fabricating multiple felony charges, and assaulting a compliant citizen in the street, simply because he believed his badge granted him absolute immunity. Tomorrow morning, I am calling the Attorney General. The Oakmont Hills Police Department is going to be placed under a federal consent decree. Every arrest Officer Gallagher has made in the past 5 years will be audited, and you will be answering to a federal grand jury regarding your department's training and oversight. Arthur turned to Agent Walsh. Gregory, I am going home now. I have an agent outside with your keys, Arthur, Walsh said softly. He will drive your car to your house. You ride with me. As Arthur walked out of the precinct, the red and blue lights of the FBI vehicles reflecting off the wet pavement, he didn't look back. Inside, Brian Gallagher was being dragged out in chains, finally experiencing the terrifying, inescapable weight of the justice system he had so eagerly weaponized against others. The fallout was catastrophic, immediate, and heavily publicized. By sunrise, the story had broken. Major news networks ran the headline on a continuous loop. Racist suburban cop arrests black federal judge. FBI takes over precinct. The dashcam audio, leaked inevitably to the press, played on every radio station and morning show in the country. The public outrage was a tidal wave. Mayor Richard Bennett of Oakmont Hills held an emergency press conference the next afternoon, visibly sweating under the harsh camera lights. He announced the immediate, forced resignation of Chief David Harrison and welcomed the Department of Justice's civil rights investigation with open arms and full transparency. It was a desperate attempt to save the city from the inevitable multi-million-dollar lawsuits that were already piling up. But the true drama unfolded 6 months later, inside the soaring, mahogany-paneled walls of the United States District Courthouse, the very building where Arthur Pendleton reigned supreme. Brian Gallagher's trial was swift and brutal. Stripped of his badge, his union backing, and his unearned swagger, Gallagher sat at the defense table looking small, pale, and terrified. His high-priced defense attorney, Charles Whitmore, had attempted every trick in the book, claiming the audio was taken out of context, claiming Gallagher felt threatened, begging for a plea deal. The federal prosecutors declined everything. They wanted blood. Arthur Pendleton did not preside over the case, of course. He was the star witness. When Arthur took the stand, the courtroom fell into an absolute, breathless hush. He wore a pristine, charcoal grey suit, his silver hair perfectly trimmed, his posture immaculately straight. He recounted the events of that rainy night with clinical precision. He didn't embellish. He didn't need to. The raw, unfiltered truth of the dashcam audio, paired with the quiet dignity of his testimony, painted a devastating picture. Judge Pendleton, the federal prosecutor asked during direct examination, when the defendant threatened to lock you in a concrete box for 3 years, did you fear for your life? Arthur looked across the courtroom, locking eyes with Gallagher. Gallagher couldn't hold his gaze. He stared down at his shackled hands. I did not fear for my life, counselor, Arthur replied, his deep voice carrying easily to the gallery. I knew who I was, and I knew the immense power of the office I hold would ultimately protect me. But what terrified me, what breaks my heart even today, is the absolute certainty that if I had been a 22-year-old college student or a father driving home from a late shift at a factory, I would currently be in state prison. The defendant's actions were not an aberration. They were a routine. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the verdict was read, Brian Gallagher stood on shaking legs. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault by a peace officer, we find the defendant guilty. Presiding Judge Robert Henderson, a man known for his merciless sentencing, looked down at Gallagher with open disgust. "Mr. Gallagher," Judge Henderson boomed, "you were entrusted with a badge and a gun to protect the public. Instead, you used them as tools of terror, motivated by nothing more than your own vile prejudice and a grotesque abuse of authority. You picked the wrong man on the wrong night, and in doing so, you exposed a rot that this court will not tolerate." Henderson banged his gavel. "I sentence you to 84 months in a maximum security federal penitentiary, to be followed by 10 years of supervised release. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals." A choked sob escaped Gallagher's throat as the marshals grabbed his arms, roughly pulling his hands behind his back to apply the heavy steel chains. Click, click. The sound echoed in the courtroom, a poetic, devastating mirror to the cuffs he had slapped onto Arthur Pendleton's wrists 6 months prior. Arthur watched from the back row of the gallery as Gallagher was led away through the side door, his career, his freedom, and his reputation completely destroyed by his own arrogance. Arthur stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He walked out of the courtroom, passing through the heavy oak doors and stepping out into the bright, clear afternoon sunlight. He descended the wide marble steps of the courthouse, acknowledging the respectful nods of the federal marshals and passing attorneys. He climbed into his repaired, perfectly clean Lexus LS. As he started the engine, he looked at his wrists. The bruises had long since faded, but the memory of the cold steel remained. Justice had been served today. One bad cop had been removed from the streets. But Arthur knew the truth of his profession. Tomorrow, the sun would rise, and there would be more work to do. He shifted the car into drive, pulling smoothly into the flow of traffic, ready to return to the bench and continue the fight. Power, arrogance, and prejudice are a dangerous combination. But as this story proves, nobody is above the law, especially when they mess with the very man who enforces it. Officer Gallagher thought his badge gave him the right to ruin a man's life, but justice served him a heavy dose of his own medicine. True authority doesn't come from a gun or a badge. It comes from integrity. If this story of ultimate karma and justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories where the truth fights back. Leave a comment below. What would you have done in Judge Pendleton's shoes? See you in the next one.